Welcome to week 17. You've survived it this long. If you've missed episodes and want to catch up, they are all available on FJMMINISTRIES, Ministries, at .org. And then go under catechetical material. Uh, Depending upon how the future goes, we may start repeating some of these episodes. But it's always good to have you with us week after week. Now, last time, we had the God of Israel routing the gods of Egypt. And now we start looking at what follows. As you know, the Pharaoh said, "You're free to go. You can leave Egypt." And as soon as the Israelites reached the shore of the Red Sea, Pharaoh once again changed his mind, and he sent his army once more. And so now we once again have our God, the God of Israel, in battle against Egyptian forces. In this case, the Egyptian army. And the Israelites were able to escape through a divided sea that they were able to walk through on dry land. And then the sea closed in on the Egyptians once the Israelites were safely across the sea and into the desert. Okay, they had given up one set of enemies, only to pick up another set. Basically, what do people always want? Food and water, the basics. And now they're in a desert, and it's known as a place where there's a shortage of those two things. So God created springs to come out of rocks, and he rained down a mysterious substance which we call manna. Now, it's probably a reaction that the Jews in the desert had to what they found. The Hebrew word manu, what is it? And so it became manna, but basically it's just what? Exodus 16. Now, the Israelites then arrived at their initial destination under Moses, because that's where a covenant was going to be made. And we've already seen covenants as a family bond. And God told Israel that Israel is my firstborn son in Exodus chapter 4, verse 22, which means that God's purpose was to adopt the nation of Israel formally into a familial relationship. And God makes quite a promise to Israel just before he appears in his awesome glory on Sinai to give them the commandments. He said, "If you will obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be a royal priesthood and a holy nation." Any bells going off in here? Basically, God creates, and he created a priesthood, he created a nation. And this person or persons created were his son. Sounds just like Adam. And so he's going to have the Jews are going to have a royal, kingly, and priestly status in this new covenant. Now, does this mean that God doesn't have a plan for the rest of humanity? He's just going to be solely focused on the Jews wandering in the desert. No, God doesn't say Israel is my only son. He says, Israel is my firstborn son. And this implies that all the other nations are younger sons of God. Well, I'm a priest. Yes, I can say Mass or liturgy by myself, but also I can prefer to have people present. Of course, now with this COVID-19, Father Martin and I here say Mass. It's just the two of us celebrating, and we hope people are watching on TV. Is anybody out there watching? Is anybody watching this? And, so that we need people. And it's not just because we want to show. In other words, the people are important because they are the ones worshiping. The priest is a kind of leader of worship, the head prayer, so to speak. And we want to make a beautiful noise unto the Lord. And well, if you've heard my singing, I don't have a beautiful voice, and God is probably going, oy, oy. People are needed to worship, but also people are needed to be served, and so that's part of the priesthood. So God's plan A. Israel is in charge, and the world belongs to God, and they all follow Israel as the priest and the king. So Israel is going to rule the world. Give it some time, it was the idea that they understood right away that this was not happening overnight. And so but you could see the idea had not disappeared at the time of Jesus even. They wanted to be free of the Romans, but they also wanted, in a sense, the Romans to be under them. And so this was God's plan A. And so this would involve, once again, a covenant. And this covenant, to put the plan into practice, had to be signed, sealed, and delivered at Mount Sinai. Now, you've got all the great dramatic effects. You have an earthquake, fire, darkness, a cloud, smoke, and lightning surrounding the mountain. And Moses goes up the mount, and God gives him the 10 Commandments written on tablets. As a result of being in God's presence, Moses' face begins to glow. Exodus 34:29 through 30. And so some artists have expressed that in terms of what you'd call rays of light coming from his face. But what you have being established is a filial relationship. God the Father, Israel the firstborn son. Now, this is the same relationship that Adam had with God. Now, Adam had one rule. And, most of us have some experience with families, and families have rules. Some rules are written down. Some rules are spoken. I always remember one couple before they got married, the bride said to the husband, I have one rule. Don't hit me. And I think it was a very good rule. But, every relationship of a couple has rules. In other words, for you guys watching this, if the love of your life says, does this dress make me look fat? Get a very serious face, look at her and say, does this shirt make me look stupid? Oh, well, I had to try. And so the thing is, there are certain things that you do which are laws that are unwritten, and certain rules are laws that are written. And so, and what do you do with the rules when you get them? Well, I remember in some homes that there was a like a chores list on the refrigerator. This is what you do. This is what you do, and sometimes there was a negotiation around the original plan that the parents put out. Hey, I'll take the trash out if you do the dishes or something like that. So, but the rules allow the functioning of society, because see now, or functioning of family, the Jews are going to have a society. They are going to not only govern themselves, but they're going to govern all the other nations of the world. And so, therefore, there has to be a structure and rules to be followed. So, God's adopting Israel as his firstborn son. The Ten Commandments are the family rules. Now, the first three deal with the relationship with the Father. The next seven deal with the sibling relationship. Logical. You shall have no other gods. There is only one God. God has effectively proven that there are no other gods because he's defeated them all. Don't misuse the name of God. Now, if I know your name, I can call you. I can say things about you to other people and ruin your reputation. The knowledge of the name is, in a sense, a gift that somebody gives. You've given them your name and you trust them to use it responsibly. And if you use it responsibly and well and respectfully, good relationship. But if you tell lies about them and, well, the relationship obviously isn't so good. Keep the Sabbath day holy. Now, this is going to develop. And just a note for Catholics here especially, it doesn't say go to Mass on Sunday. That is a commandment of the Catholic Church. That is not a commandment of God. That is truly a man-made rule. But following the tradition, and you'll see this tradition in the following books of the Hebrew Scriptures, that there's a need to interpret in action specifically how you do these things. So, for the Jews, keeping the Sabbath holy is actually very different from how Catholics keep the day holy. For the Jews, it begins at sunset. The house is cleaned, and you have Sabbath prayers led by usually the mother of the household, and you don't plan on anything else on the Sabbath. Christians, well, I go to church on Sunday, and I can do whatever I want for the rest of the day. Two different interpretations of the same commandment. And then the behavior towards the sibling: honor your father and mother. It doesn't have any thou shalt or thou shalt. It's very simple honor, because honor is something that is flexible and changes over time. A little child honors their parents by being obedient. A teenager honors their parents by being respectful and obedient. A young adult, more respect, less obedience. Now, as I think I mentioned before, I was 50 years old and my mother's still telling me things to do. To some degree, I was obedient, but now I'm on my own and have a life and everything else like that. I don't have to obey everything, but I always have to show respect. And I always remember, because it didn't happen to my parents, but I work here, and we have a lot of our veterans that suffer from dementia. And it's always wonderful to see children come who visit their parents, and their parents have no idea who they are, or the parents have no idea who they are, and the parents. Uh, we had one guy here. He was living on March 25th, 2 years previous, and in the next 3 years, he only got up to, I think it was around August. You know, they lived in a different, but the family always showed them respect because they were the parents. And sometimes you have to tell your parents what to do. No, Dad, you can't take your pants down here in the hallway. That is showing respect for your parents. Not, hey, you old fart, but whatever. Now, the next commandment, do not, and it's the Jewish Bibles translate it as murder, and the Christian Bibles translate it as kill. And there is a big difference between those two words. Killing is taking a life. Murder is taking a life without, in a sense, cause. Self-defense, you can take a life that is not considered killing. It's not considered murder. It's not considered murder, even if it is a killing. And there is a killing interpretation, which is even stricter. And you see in some of the Jewish writings, you can't take any life because all life comes from God. And so God has made the exceptions in terms of God telling the Jews, you can kill those people in war, or you can kill those animals as long as you kill them properly in terms of being kosher. So even though these seem to be very clear, there has been a lot of interpretation going on. You shall not commit or do not commit adultery. Adultery in its literal sense is fornication with a married person. Now, part of the reason for understanding this is that to the Jews, the act of having sex with someone created a marriage. So you had sex with them, you were married to them. Simple. So if you had sex with anybody else, either you were trying to make a new spouse or you were committing adultery. And the penalty for adultery was death. And we can see, where polygamy did exist within Judaism, even though monogamy was considered higher. Now, as I remind younger people who think they're free to have sex with anybody they want to have with, I said, remember that God thinks you're married to that person. The first person you had sex with is your spouse in God's eyes forever. Now you may go on and get married in a Buddhist temple or something else. This is where God says the first person you have sex with is you're married and everything else is adultery. And that's where you start getting some interesting interpretations of how and when you can divorce. And that's why some people say in terms of Matthew's statement, lewd conduct is a separate case. In other words, if fornication of adultery existed, then you could divorce that person. Do not steal. No exception for pens at work. Very simple. You can't take something that doesn't belong to you. Do not lie or bear false witness. Now, when you go to court, you raise your hand and you promise before God that what you're telling is the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So help me God. Well, we added the so help me God idea into that, but why? Because we found out that people actually did lie. And so this was bringing God down as a witness. Well, that is already built into the commandment. When you speak, you tell the truth. Jesus' interpretation of this was say yes when you mean yes and no when you mean no. Everything else comes from the evil one. So, it's not just in court. In some interpretations, it's in every time you open your mouth, and in others, it's a legal issue. Do not covet anyone's spouse or anyone's possessions. Now, what is to covet? Covet means to desire something that belongs to someone else. And a very simple thing is, how do you have a relationship with someone who you want their life, their car, whatever it is? There can't be a relation. And a most important thing is the relationship we have with other people. And so we don't desire. Now, that if I have a friend who's got a car, I think it's a wonderful car. Oh, I would love to have a car like that. That's not coveting. Coveting is, I want that car. I will use my friendship with that person to somehow get that car or get that spouse. I will get them divorced. I will work on so that that person can become mine. So your relationship, just by the act of the coveting, has already been broken with that person. And you see the same kind of idea in Jesus' day. If you look lustfully at a woman, you are committing adultery. Because where did adultery begin? It began in the desire. It began in the coveting that we're talking about here. And so that would bring a relationship to an end, and it would be a serious break. Now, when Pope St. John Paul II quoted Jesus, and he said, anyone who looks lustfully at people in the media jumped all over him and said, obviously it's because he's a celibate. He doesn't understand the sexual desire. Oh, he understood what sexual desire is. Read his work. But he is being very specific in that word, lust. The word lust is where you desire a person for sexual gratification. They are to fulfill your need, whether it be that person, it be something you take matters into your own hands, or a Lord doll, whatever. All those things. The sole concern is on your sexual gratification, and that has no concern for the other person. It is turning the other person into an object. So, following the Ten Commandments, the next 3 chapters of Exodus, 21 through 23, give the Israelites additional rules derived from the Ten Commandments. Rules meant to govern their life as a nation. After all, they're not just a family soon to be. They are going to be a government with civil laws. And God already starts giving them a governmental structure, which changes, and we'll see how it changes over time, but also certain laws. Now, there's a story in Exodus 24 that emphasizes the sonship of Israel to God. Moses goes to the foot of Mount Sinai and builds an altar there with some help of some quote-unquote young men, which we'll figure out who they are later. He offers sacrifices to God. And then he reads all the commandments, the family rules, so to speak, to the people. All that the Lord has spoken, we will do, the people said back. In other words, here's the laws, and the people say, the Lord spoke them, we will do. Simple. We are going to obey the rules. It's kind of like, raising your hand, as many of you did here in the military. Do you swear to defend the Constitution of the United States, etc., etc.? And also obey the officers over you. That was a little tough one. After Moses does this, he takes the blood of the sacrifice and he sprinkles half of it on the people. The other half is on the altar. Now, the altar in Byzantine Christianity represents God's footstool or the presence of God. And that idea comes from the Jewish altar, which represented the presence of God among the people. And so by putting the blood on the altar and the people meant, since it was one source of blood, not from two different animals, they shared one blood. People and God were now a family. But the ritual also had another meaning behind it. If either party breaks the covenant, may his blood be shed. So if God broke the covenant, well, that's not going to happen. But God is, and the Jews are saying, if we break this covenant, shed our blood. Now, Moses ends this ceremony with some very solemn words. Behold, in Exodus 24:18, 8, behold the blood of the covenant which the Lord has made with you. So, ceremony is over. It's like when my family, when I was growing up, it was really funny. After we'd only go out to eat on Sundays after Mass. We'd go out to a diner. And so when I was a teenager, I said to my father, I'm not going to go to Mass today on a Sunday. But I said, I'll meet you at the diner. And my father said, no, you won't. You go to the Mass, you enjoy the diner. You don't go to Mass, you don't enjoy the diner. Okay, so this was almost the same thing. Families eat together, just as they worshiped together. Now, things have obviously been changing in our society, where you got to fit in food with sports games. And I remember when I lived in Philadelphia, the local priests got together and basically told the public sports leagues and the Catholic League, you will not have games before noon. And they got the parents and the churches all got together. And the parents kind of liked it because at least they weren't having games at 8 o'clock Sunday morning anymore. And so that went into effect. I don't know if it's still going on. And then there's also all those other lessons that are going on. I always remember, there's always a great deal of emphasis. Let's have our children do all these activities. Let them go to singing and swimming and And I always remember I was at a swim meet, and this one mother was very upset because the swim meet was running longer. And I said, what's wrong? She said, well, the coach told me it was going to end by this time. I said, yeah, but they got started late because the other team showed up late. Well, then they should have forfeited. Going on and on. Some of the kids were not as fast as others. And so things went on. And she said, well, I've got to take him to his violin lesson. Because after the violin lesson, he's got to have some time for his homework. Okay. And he came to the swim lesson from a sports game. It's too much emphasis being put on accomplishing all those activities. Family is where you got to bring it all together. And the family meal was good. But in ancient times, that's the time before organized sports, families used to eat together. And that is why soon as the one blood ceremony is over, God invites Moses and the leaders of the people up Mount Sinai to share a meal. The Bible says they saw God and they ate and drank. Exodus 24. And notice, it's kind of interesting, whenever God does something important, it involves a meal. Christian thing here. You have the meal on Mount Sinai for the Ten Commandments. You have the Last Supper with Jesus for the New Covenant. And this New Covenant is also extended into the Eucharistic meal, going back. Now that the family making ceremonies are concluded, God has not been so close to human beings since Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden. The garden once served as a place where God could meet and talk with his children. The children of Israel are going to need a new Eden where they can meet God. And it would help if this Eden were portable, because as you see, they are currently wandering around in the desert. So please, thank God, didn't make it, the desert was the only place where we could meet God. So God brings Moses back up Mount Sinai to get instructions for the tabernacle, a big tent for meeting God, decorated with reminders of Eden, Exodus 25 through 31. This is the honeymoon of the people of Israel with God. Everything is good, everything is finally worked out, but the honeymoon doesn't last long. And so we will continue on with what happens next after that. Talk about the end of the honeymoon in Exodus 32. So I want to thank you once again for spending your time with me. I hope you found it somewhat beneficial. And, well, maybe you can go back and look at some of the others. If you have questions, you can always come to Building 314, come to my office and ask them. You can send me an email at jonathan.morse@va.gov, or you can go to the website of fjmministries.org and do it that way. All the previous instructions are there, and I hope you are finding this a blessing. I find it a blessing. It helps, that, like in everything else, to go back and review things over and over again. And every time you do, you kind of get a new insight. So the more you do, the more you read your Bible, the more insight you'll get into the meeting. So I thank you for being with us this week.